If you've been a longtime viewer of this channel, you might recall a comedy sketch from a few years back where a character I played took a look through this mouthpiece and tossed it away in immense disgust and frustration. Let's just say there was a reason for it. Hey there everybody, it's your host Sam. Hope you're all doing well today. Welcome back to another episode of Mouthpiece Spotlight on the Samuel Plays Brass channel, where, taking center stage, we have the abominable Jet Tone Studio 10S. This here is a page out of the official Jet Tone mouthpiece brochure, where we can see that the 10S was originally referred to as a Model 5A, which is curious. In any case, this model has some interesting specifications. Starting with the rim, it's extremely flat and broad on the face. There's a lot of rim surface area that makes contact with your chops, and this mouthpiece is known for having a very low alpha angle, which means there isn't a lot of perceived sharpness on your face. It's more akin to a Shilky rim, for instance, than a Bach, and it's also got a very steep undercut where the rim drops right into the cup with basically no further warning. And now that I bring up the cup of this mouthpiece, we're onto more of the perceived size, which the rim has less bearing on, frankly. As I mentioned, this is the smallest mouthpiece I own. The cup is incredibly shallow compared to your conventional or typical C cup, and it's a little bit unique in the sense that the walls of the cup don't come in to form more of a bowl shape, but they're a little bit more slanted. This is what we call a V cup, and it's used to supposedly increase efficiency in playing. It definitely is an efficient mouthpiece in some sense of the word. The cup diameter is also definitely on the smaller side. You can see from one wall of the rim to the other, it's measured out to be 15.87 millimeters or 0.625 inches. For reference, more than 90% of players play something in between 16 and 17 millimeters, so this is definitely on the smaller side. At the point of greatest resistance on this mouthpiece, what we call the throat measures out to 0.144 inches or a size 27 on the drill chart. This is very standard for many modern mouthpieces that haven't been altered in any way, but it still contributes to this mouthpiece overall being fairly small. An occupational hazard of playing the 10S, or indeed any small or shallow mouthpiece, is the pitch center being raised. Less volume in the cup means the pitch is naturally going to be a little bit higher, whereas my normal tuning slide pull is about to there. When I play with the 10S, I'm right to the end of the polish section, right there, just to keep the pitch down enough to, play more or less in tune. That's not the end of the world, but it is definitely something you'll have to keep in mind. The trouble is, even when the tuning slide is set to a comparatively correct and in-tune length, slotting on this mouthpiece is still a little bit of a nightmare. There are a couple different types of slottings that can affect your playing, and I'd like to address two distinct types in this review. If I have to use a mouthpiece as small and shallow as a Jet Tone, I'd better be able to put it to use in vintage jazz, where mouthpieces like this were a lot more common. The trouble is, in vintage jazz, there are a lot of pitch shakes. What we call a shake is where you start on one discrete partial, and then either by shaking the horn physically or preferably just by altering the tongue position a little bit, you flick on and off of partials quickly to create sort of a raucous shaking effect. This is usually easy on lightweight mouthpieces and ones that stick out of the horn a lot because it loosens up the slotting a little bit. The trouble is, the slots are strangely firm on this mouthpiece, to where I get on a partial, and because the mouthpiece feels iron to my face with that rim, I really can't move on and off of it easily. I tried with a conventional mouthpiece that I get a lot more use out of, with a thinner rim and a much larger inner diameter, and I found I was shaking on pitches a lot more easily, which was quite a surprise. Oftentimes with shallow mouthpieces especially, I can shake the pitch most easily that way, but despite the shallowness of the Jet Tone, it really doesn't work for me in that area. Now, unfortunately, when I say tight slots, I don't entirely mean that, because there's another aspect of slotting where this mouthpiece is, in my opinion, completely off the walls. Let's say you're actually trying to stay on a given pitch rather than waver around between partials. Every horn and mouthpiece combination has a given amount of variability in how much you can actually bend that pitch in and out of tune. This is what we call pitch bending, and it can affect vibrato and similar things. The trouble is, there's a little bit of variation in my day-to-day tonguing, where sometimes I'm tonguing on the bottom of my front teeth, sometimes towards the top, sometimes a little bit more on the roof of my mouth, and I need a mouthpiece that, no matter how I attack the note, will stay consistent in terms of intonation. The Jet Tone 10S is anything but consistent. Depending on the tongue position when I start notes, I get wildly different intonation patterns with this mouthpiece, which means a couple of things. First of all, my intonation is totally inconsistent between takes, but also, because I'm out of the slot, I lose the characteristic sound of this mouthpiece, which is a big problem, considering I just sound out of tune and pinched and strained as a result. Some of the world's greatest trumpet players and teachers have subscribed to the school of thought that you should use a smaller mouthpiece for more efficient playing. The trouble is, without an equally efficient player behind the wheel, the mouthpiece is absolutely a lost cause. If you put a lot of air through a mouthpiece, this really isn't the choice for you because it backs up on you and creates a very pinched and crass sound. But also, if you're used to playing on deeper mouthpieces like me, your lips will tend to protrude into the cup a little bit more. This is what we call high lip engagement. And high lip engagement in this type of mouthpiece results in the lips scratching against the bottom of the cup, which is just an incredibly unpleasant sensation. It stops the lips from vibrating properly, and unless you can back the lips up and not let them protrude into the cup, you really can't play this mouthpiece efficiently, so to speak. Another supposed benefit of mouthpieces that more closely resemble a flat piece of sheet metal is range. Some players claim that a shallow mouthpiece helps prop their bottom lip up and create a more efficient embouchure setting for a wide range. The trouble is, this is so far from the case for me personally that it's just utterly impractical. On this mouthpiece, for me personally, anything below a high C, which by its name, to all intents and purposes, is a high note, is fuzzy and almost unattainable unless I'm really, really careful. A good, well-balanced mouthpiece for a player is going to respond naturally from the lowest F sharp up to high C and then beyond. Now that's better. Now, above high C, there is kind of this optimal range in the mouthpiece, especially around double G, where you really do get a lot of zing in the sound, and the high compression of the mouthpiece makes it a lot of fun to play. Except when you go above double G. On any given day, I can generally hit a double C and a few notes above with reasonable ease, and I've tested every single trumpet mouthpiece on that rack for a double C, and I found that all of them work decently well. The trouble is, considering that this is, to all intents and purposes, a lead mouthpiece, double C and above are just stupid. They fuzz out nearly as badly as the low range, which is to say, it's problematic. This mouthpiece, believe it or not, has some of the worst double Cs and Ds that I've ever played. And before you try and ask me, yes, I did test this mouthpiece on the Piccolo trumpet. Casting aside the fact that this is far too heavy-handed of a mouthpiece for me to use on the pick, it's actually not quite as bad in this regard. The sound is a little bit more sparkly like I was trying to achieve and failing to achieve with the B-flat trumpet, but it does definitely get a little bit shrill, and the tone starts to get weak and fuzzy in the middle register, and slotting starts going out the window. Tonguing gets really, really hard as you transition registers. In general, no matter what instrument you plug this thing into, it really just prefers to stay on the same note, which in modern trumpet playing can be a little bit of a problem. If you're not living in the era of Beethoven, you want to be able to change notes a little bit. I will point out that the shallow V-cup is actually a really good design choice for Piccolo trumpet. The Stork Vacchiano series, which I use almost exclusively on the Piccolo trumpet, have a shallow V-cup that really help to attain that sparkly sound. The trouble is, this is just a little bit overdone. Despite all the time I've spent lampooning this mouthpiece extensively, I'm of the belief that if it exists commercially and is available to buy, it's probably not an utter failure, and probably at least one person out there will find some benefit from it. So who will actually make good use of the Jet Tone 10S? There's a couple of attributes I'd like to point out. First of all, they'd need thinner lips than me. This is a little bit too much heft to make it work. And they would also do better with a neutral or even jaw position. I have a little bit of an overbite, despite all the corrective work I've had done dentally to my face. So that means I really can't pivot with this mouthpiece or change bell angles at all. Where I start, I have to stay, which is a problem for me. But if you have a very even bite and don't pivot at all while you play, this could be a good mouthpiece. For me, the rim feels iron to my face, which is a problem. It's best for studio and commercial players who play long sessions and need that slight endurance boost of a shallower cup. The rim is most akin to something like a Shilke rather than the Bach end of the scale, where they're a little bit pointier or rounder depending on who you ask, not broad and flat. And this could actually be put to use by a pressure player as long as they're not a big air heaver like me and don't put a lot of air down the tube. because the flatness of the rim actually makes it fine to push into your face a little bit more. I don't particularly like to, and I don't particularly advise it either, but there are players who it could definitely come into use for. I'd also like to say that although some jet tone models are particularly rare or just out of production entirely, there are some friendlier alternatives to the 10S if it's not your cup of tea. For instance, you might consider the 7S for a slightly roomier feel if cup diameter is the biggest red flag for you, or you might consider the 10M or MD if cup depth is the biggest red flag. It's honestly just a question of trying out these different variables and finding what works best for you. And that's where we're going to call it today on the Jet Tone 10S. This has been a very interesting review to make. This is quite a unique and historic mouthpiece, so I hope you've enjoyed watching. If you have, make sure to leave a like. My Mouthpiece Spotlight playlist will be up in the card in the top right corner. There's plenty more videos to check out like this, and plenty more on the way. So if you're interested, make sure to subscribe to stay tuned. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, we'll see you on the flip side.